back to Andy Kim's International Finance. Last time, talked about historical perspective of the waves of globalization. It comes and goes, ebbs and flows, depending on the political situation. Why is it important? International finance inevitably, right, is subject to geopolitical risk or political risk, in whichever way you call it, right? And then globalization, right, affects your business environment, and then capital raising environment as well. So, how does the textbook say about this? Well, globalization of the world economy, major trends, right, and developments, they talk about it. And their discussion is rather focused much more on the recent trend, right? The third wave of globalization, I may say. Emergence of globalization, globalized financial markets, and then the euro as a global currency. That is obviously after Second World War. It has been there, right? And then trade liberalization and economic integration and privatization of the what used to be communist world, right? They're privatizing all those social infrastructure, and then the major banks in Goldman Sachs kind of investment banks got in there to get a deal of privatizing those companies. And then global financial crisis happened, East Asian financial crisis 10 years before that, right? And then Europe's sovereign debt crisis followed it, Brexit, Trump, all these kind of things. Now, emergence of globalized financial markets. What are we supposed to say? Deregulation of financial market. It was coupled with advances in technology. These have greatly reduced information and transaction costs, which has led to financial innovations such as currency futures and options transaction, and multi-currency bonds, and the cross-border stock listings, and the international mutual funds, and exchange traded funds. Nowadays, you must be familiar with ETFs, the exchange traded funds. And then cross-currency bonds, multi-currency bonds. Those things were, attempted like 100 years ago as well. Anyway, emergence of euro as a global currency, a momentous event in the history of world financial systems. Yeah, ECU, right? And then EU, euro, right? The currency currently more than 300 million Europeans in the 19th centuries are using the common currency on a daily basis. And Austria, Belgium, Cyprus, and all these countries, you see. The transaction domain of the euro may become larger than the US dollars in the near future. And then right, and then trade liberalization and economic integration, right? Over the past 50 years, international trade increased about twice as fast as world GDP. There has been a change in the attitude of many of the world's governments who have abandoned mercantilist views and embraced free trade as a surest route to prosperity for their citizenry. The principal argument for international trade is based upon the theory of comparative advantage, and then the appendix of the textbook discusses it. Self-explanatory, so go ahead and read it. And then liberalization of protectionist legislation. Yeah, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, is multilateral agreement among member countries that has reduced many barriers to trade. And World Trade Organization, WTO, is much more famous these days, right? Has the power to enforce the rules of international trade. On January 2005, the era of quotas on imported textiles ended, and this is an event of historic proportions. And then the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, called for phasing out impediments to trade between Canada, Mexico, and the US over a 15-year period, beginning in 1994. Full implementation occurred in 2009. For Mexico, the ratio of export to GDP has increased dramatically from 2.2% in 1973 to 31.7% in 2000 11. The increased trade has resulted in increased numbers of jobs and a higher standard of living for all member nations, member countries. Okay, so there may be some disagreement about these views, right? Depending on where you stand. Job export and all these kind of things has been a tremendous issue, right, in the US. And then getting out of NAFTA has been a big issue in Donald Trump's period. And then privatization has occurred as well in Eastern or Second World, they say, right? The selling of state-run enterprises to investors is also known as denationalization, right? Privatization is often seen in socialist economies in transition to market economies. By most estimates, this increases the efficiency of the enterprise. It also often spurs a tremendous increase in cross-border investments because this is a great opportunity to do international mergers. Yeah, China comes in over here. State-owned enterprise SOEs, right, have been listed on organized stock exchanges. More than 1,500 companies are currently listed in China's stock exchanges. The Chinese government still retains the majority stakes in most public firms. Chinese citizens can buy A shares while foreigners are limited to buy B shares, right? I told you before, it's Swiss Nestle, right? Nationalistic sentiment, right? Always there, okay? Global financial crisis of 2008 and 9. The Great Recession was the most serious and synchronized economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Lehman Brothers and then Bear Stearns. Okay, one of them bankrupt and the other just scrapped by other investment banks, right? Used to be something unimaginable, right? Remember, I worked for Bank of America with the hope that I would learn some advanced skills in solid skills in credit risk assessment, believing that the Bank of America or American system will be like something very, very reliable. Never going bankrupt. But it was something close to that. Happened. Okay? Life. You never know. Okay? What you're gonna get. Like factors included households and financial institutions borrowed too much and took too much risk. The risk was repackaged with securitization, and so defaults on subprime mortgages in the US came to threaten the solvency of a teacher's retirement plans in Norway. Yeah, international implication, right? It's all intertwined so that the bankruptcy in the US is affecting an institution in totally unimagined countries in the globe. And the US unemployment rate, you see that, right? Yeah, and then Dow Jones Industrial Average, the stock market index, goes to the opposite direction like that, okay? Of course, the unemployment rate tells us about the recession, right? Of course. And then the Great Recession, they call it, 2008 and 9, right? Everything is great these days. Nowadays, they say what? Great Reset. If you Google search World Economic Forum 2021, Charles Schwab, or what is that? The guy and the top guy in WEF, they say, let's discuss something reset or something like that. Just like a jubilee in Old Testament Bible, every 50 years. Forgiveness of all those bad debts and kind of things, right? And let's reset the economy somehow. Great reset, or whatever. Everything is great these days. And last year, you know what happened, right? And Europe's sovereign debt crisis 2010. In December 2009, the new Greek government revealed that its budget deficit for the year would be a whopping 12.7% of GDP. Not the 3.7% forecast, almost like 4 times the size. Right. Investors sold off Greek government's bonds and the rating agencies downgraded them to junk, of course. Um, what was the economic, the transparency of the government accounting, and then this uh, fiscal budget conservatism? Where is that? Nothing. So that's why people were so much scared, and then they were like dumping it. While Greece represented only 2.5% of Eurozone GDP, the crisis became a Euro-wide debt crisis because it's all about the neighbor spillover effect, right? And then, given that one country gets suspected, what about the other countries' quality of this transparency and all this kind of budget situation, right? Pig, they say. Portugal, Italy, and then Spain, and then Ireland. Yeah. The challenge remains that the fiscal indiscipline of one euro country can escalate to a euro-wide crisis. And then Greece paid no premium above the German rate until the late fall 2009. The Greek interest rate rose until the bailout package on May 9th. So what you see is the dollar euro exchange rate, okay, movement, and then exchange rate red lines. And then black line is a Greek bond yield, right? Interest rate in Greece, right? Going up to like 20%. It's just like 1997 South Korea, right? German bond yield, right? That dashed line was far below there. Okay. And then pigs, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Yeah. The countries of similar sovereign debt crisis. They were these countries, right? Recent phenomena against globalization is an additional note that I inserted. So let's see. What next? It's this part, okay? What is this? Brexit! Yes, Britain getting out of Euro. Yes. And thinking about, Rothschild, 200 years ago, this guy did their business in London, and he was a strong strong pusher for this globalization. And then now, Britain is the first one to move out of that Eurozone, and then going against globalization movement. So what? If he were alive, he would have said, what the hell is happening here? Unbelievable, right? The unexpected outcome of British referendum held on June 2016. Britons voted to leave the EU. Likely outcome is a weakening of both the United Kingdom and the European Union. And Brexit revealed some of the difficulties with free trade and global economic integration. The free movement of goods, capital, and people leads to economic growth, but also leads to political opposition. And you know that, right? British people, right? Not all people liked globalization. Only the finance elites or business elites enjoyed the benefit of this globalization. Okay, the rest of the people suffered because of the job export and all these like unskilled laborers. They had a hard time finding jobs. So their voices pushed this guy, not me, pushed this guy, Boris, right, to Boris Johnson, right, to get out of that European Union. Just like Trump, right, over here. NAFTA update to Trump. Yeah, you can see that, right? And then, moreover, you remember the borderline, right? Mexican border, what he did, right? The Great Wall. Everything is great. And then the anti-globalization sentiment was so big in Charlottesville, Virginia. Their demonstration went on like this against globalization. You see that, how do you say? Feel the heat, right? Oh my God. Job export is a big concern. and then especially job exports to China or other countries with cheaper labor. Okay, is a big issue for the people in the this world, right? Recent phenomena against globalization, bipolarization of income and wealth since 1989. I show you this graph, right? You see the CEO pay ratio. The CEO to worker compensation ratio used to be like less than 10 times or something. Okay, 1 year salary, not the salary, but the whole 연봉, or like a whole payment to the CEO in a year was about 10 times like of the average workers in 1970s to 80s, but it slowly grew. But after 1989, this is my take, personal take, so personal opinion, but I think this has a lot of implication as well, because after the fall of the East Germany's, what's that? The Berlin Wall, right? The communist world fell down, and there's no other alternative to capitalist world. Now it's brakeless accelerator going on, and you see the pay gap between the CEO and the average workers skyrocketed to like about 400 times. US CEO pays, right, like this, and then with the financial crisis they dipped, right, like this, but it's bouncing backward, right, like this, and this 300 times level, 300 years. So CEO works 1 year and then gets, right, compensation. You work 300 years to that that much of an amount, right? Some of you, a lot of you may complain about it, but there is an economic justification of why that has to be the case, because of the risk involved. But there's obviously some controversy going on, whether you agree or not, right? Yeah, the job exports, right? Bipolarization of income and wealth since 1989, right, has been there. The fall of, when communist threat was present, highest income tax rate was 90+%. These days, nah, not that much. Not even 50%. Challenge of pandemic risk from ever-evolving viruses is another recent things, the risk factor that you have to think about. That works against globalization, by the way. Yeah, public health concern. A multinational corporation. Yeah, so in the textbook chapter 1, the last section is about this multinational corporations. This is, MNC is a firm that has been incorporated in one country and has production and sales operations in other countries, many different countries, right? There are about 60,000 MNCs in the world. Yeah, I think that's a lower bound number, I guess. Many MNCs obtain raw materials from one country, financial capital from another, produce goods with labor and capital equipment in a third country, and sell their outputs in various other national markets. Nowadays, what? Coupang, work in Korea, raise capital in the US, and things like that. Samsung Electronics, this Korean company may be headquartered in Seoul, but they have production facilities in where? Austin, Texas. Yeah, that cold place. I hope Texan people are doing all right. Okay, wish you the best, right? Stay warm, please. As a person worked in or lived in Minnesota for 8 years, by the way, those freezing coldness, right? Unexperienced guys will have such a hard time. So my heart goes out to you. Anyway, so that's that. Exhibit 1.6, top non-financial MNCs list. You see it, and the textbook keeps updating that list. A summary, right? It's self-explanatory, so you can read and it. It is important to study international finance since we are living in a globalized and integrated world economy. What is not global these days in terms of business and finance and all these kind of things? 3 things distinguish international finance from domestic finance, which is FX, political risk, market imperfections, and expanded opportunity set. And then the theory of comparative advantage states that economic well-being is enhanced if countries produce goods and services for which they have a comparative advantage and trade for other goods. The global financial crisis of 2009 may be attributable to several factors. We're going to talk about financial crisis in chapter 2. By the way, before I forget, right? I think after undergoing, ever since last year, the global pandemic of COVID-19, I started to think like this. Thank God the global financial crisis took place a decade before COVID-19. Okay? If there was no global financial crisis 10 years ago, and we had simultaneous crisis, or just a COVID-19 last year, okay, with those shaky and feeble financial system, right? Things could have been, right? Things could have been even more disastrous. Like with the global financial crisis, the central bankers coordinated, and then these regulators worked together how to solve this problem together, and then forced the bankers to tone down or shift down the risk level so that there will be financial stability. Okay, so that's why we had at least a solid financial system to embrace or take care of that kind of expansive, unprecedented expansive fiscal policies, and then the low interest regime or quantitative easing kind of things. So that's my personal opinion about that. Anyway, privatization, yeah, that's a big thing. Multinational corporation, the concept, you get it, right? So that's it for chapter 1. Thank you very much for watching this lecture, and then hope to see you. By the way, Appendix 1, go ahead and read it, right? It's refreshing your memory about Economics 101. That is comparative advantage, 비교 우위 이론, right? Trade more, it's beneficial to you, right? That's it. Okay, so bye-bye. See you. Like and subscribe. It's great.